Hi, everyone. Olga Mack. Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self, a place where we explore the lives of in-house lawyers, their views on their practice, career, community, and things they care about. We know that in-house lawyers are human first, and they care about all kinds of things and have all kinds of adventures. So this is a place where I interview them, and we can all learn together. If you know of anyone who can contribute to that conversation, definitely let me know. Put your suggestions in the comments, tag those people, or DM me. I will be happy to get in touch with them myself. Today, I have a very special guest. It's someone that I want to consider my mentor. It's someone that I've known for a long time. In fact, I've known this person before I became a licensed lawyer in California. I met this person when I was in law school, when I had an iconic opportunity to help Yahoo integrate Flickr when I was in law school. And that was such a learning experience. At the time, he was already a practicing in-house lawyer, and I got a chance to see him in action, and he very much inspired me. And today, I have an opportunity to interview this person, so I'm really excited. Welcome me and saying hello to Duane. Duane, please introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks, Olga. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's been great knowing you all of this time. I can't believe how long ago that was that we first got connected. So I'm Duane Valz. I'm currently the General Counsel of Insitro, which is a drug discovery company that leverages machine learning to facilitate the process of discovery and treatment of disease. And I have been working in the technology industry since the mid-90s when the internet first emerged. And my journey has been mostly as IP counsel, but in the past going on to 7 years, I've transitioned into being a general counsel and working at the intersection of biotech and machine learning. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, you've had you've seen Web 1, Web 2, and in the beginning of Web 3. So it's the journey from IP lawyer to general counsel. I know something a little about. I've done that too. Tell us more about kind of how you got from there to here. What were the stops along the way?
Yeah, so I've went into law school being very interested in law and technology matters. I was IP focused, and I just find that working in the technology field, you are constantly challenged and engaged in what's going on out in the world. And it's been a remarkable past 50 years in terms of the strides that have been made in computing and genetics and so many other fields. In the mid-90s, the internet was really blooming. The World Wide Web was really taking hold when I graduated. And so that was just a fascinating way to start my career, working in the industry and working around all of the different technologies that eventually became, Web 1.0, Web 2.0, the mobile web, and other variants. So, my training as IP counsel was my inroads to just being in this space and doing what I could to add value and to support some of the great entrepreneurs and engineers and other professionals who have engaged and really created the digital world that we experience today. And I have always had an interest in a broader array of science and technology matters, not just digital communications or the web. And so with the sense that we are in the biotech century, I decided to leave a perfectly good post at Google, down fighting the smartphone wars, and sort of picked up, with the early days of really bringing machine learning to biology to make it more of an engineering discipline.
That's really cool. So you've seen the Web 1, Web 2, and the intersection of bio and web. Very exciting. You've mentioned now a few terms, so maybe you can help me, sort of define what is sort of, we mentioned Web 1, Web 2, you mentioned mobile web. What does those terms mean to you? I'm not looking for a scientific definition by any means. I'm looking sort of loosely speaking, where do you kind of put demarcations of those periods and what does that mean?
Yeah, so Web 1, I think of as the earliest versions of the World Wide Web, where we largely use the Netscape browser to access content. And that was really opened up the world as more producers put content on the web. It was accessible, through a dial-up modem or whatever you might have had back in the day. But it was a one-to sort of site experience. You would go engage with content. Your friend elsewhere might go to the same site, but that was it. You were engaging with increasingly rich and engaging content, but it wasn't quite as dynamic. Web 2.0, I think of as a set of technologies coming online, both on, web pages and in the back end, that enabled multiple users to engage on the same site or the same page simultaneously. That could be just the basics of being able to comment on a page and, help publish the content of the page and create an experience for other users to engage with. Or when we think about social networking sites, the very rich ways that you can engage with content, express your own sentiments and be networked to pages representing other users and their interests. So Web 2 is this much more interactive experience where users are both provided with more dynamic experiences and also enable producers to create more engaging experiences as a result.
And when you talk about mobile web, is that Web 2 to you, or is it a different stage?
It is, mobile web certainly makes use of Web 2.0 and brings it to the computers that we carry in our pockets. But mobility, the mobility turn where you really could experience the rich content of a web page on your phone involved different technologies, and it brought about a different experience. It just made the experience of the internet more ubiquitous, more accessible in different ways, and it opened up business models for content producers and platform operators as a result.
So thank you for Duane, for kind of laying the groundwork for the periods of times we've had. But it hasn't been all perfect, right? We have seen some challenges in Web 2, which is, I think, period we're transitioning out today. What are the sort of challenges we've seen, and what has been sort of our reaction, and have we been effective in dealing with them?
Yeah, I think one of the sentiments that we often get from enthusiastic investors and entrepreneurs is that the internet is going in one direction, just bringing us more towards goodness. And what we've seen with Web 2 and a lot of what it opens up, especially on large platforms that aggregate a lot of users and user experiences, is that with the good comes challenges, comes some bad effects. And so when you're able to connect users and have them engage with each other, sometimes badly motivated users can do a lot of damage, whether it's preying on the self-esteem of their peers in middle school or high school, or pursuing darker, more criminal activities. That's one danger. We've also seen how governments can take advantage of websites and interactions to track and surveil users and in different countries, dissidents, and to use it as a tool for repression. And we also have had incidents where the platform operators themselves, they get a much richer profile of each of their users by understanding the interactions that each user has with other users. And between how you engage on a computer and how you engage on your mobile phone, where you have location-specific information, there's a rich tapestry of information that's available and increasingly more deeply mined based on the development of machine learning and artificial intelligence to help create insights. And those are often used to improve services and create better experiences for users. But as we know, there can be downsides if this information is leaked or inadvertently made available to bad players. Then there's that much more to exploit. And even things like ad systems that really allow players with pecuniary motives or political motives to target users in a deep way. You create a whole world where users and their experiences become programmable, not just to the site operators, but to outside interests. And we've seen the impacts of that across elections and coups and a lot of social disruptions around the world. And we have to take stock of all of these downsides that come with all of the admittedly good things.
Yeah, there's Web 2, probably had many iterations and a lot of access, yes. And, I think you've made a really good description of, what could possibly go wrong when information and insights at scale about people fall into wrong hands. Social networking sort of dominated headlines. We had Meta, Facebook testify in Congress. I still remember watching that slow-mo train wreck where members of the Congress did not seem to understand, what Facebook does. Why do you think social networking has been such a focal point of our political discourse, for our discussions, for regulatory actions? Why are we all focusing on Meta?
Well, I think largely because Meta has been successful at not only engaging users much more so than other social platforms, but in very effectively expanding its reach. And so it's a global platform, and a lot of what Meta and Facebook, particularly the Blue app, has made available to users is increasingly both the envy and the object of exploitation for different players. And, it's become part of the political discourse because, not only because users engage with political content and share it and can, do so in a way that helps influence election outcomes or other political outcomes, but because of the ad systems and the fact that people are not just selling products and services, but ideas and sentiments to influence public opinion, oftentimes with misinformation, it's become, quite a flashpoint. In our country, it breaks down along political lines, and, what parts of that influence are a good thing or bad thing, but undoubtedly, the ability to sway sentiment through social networks is really powerful. And it's not just about generating money. It's having a very imbalanced impact on political discourse and political outcomes.
Yeah. I find it very interesting that, the Web 2 is very much concentrated in the hands of a few. When you're thinking about iconic Web 2 companies, you're talking, yes, we talk about Meta. I don't want to pick on Meta, and I love Facebook. But there are a few others. We talk about Amazon, we're talking about Google, we're talking maybe Netflix, we are talking about Microsoft, maybe a few others. Folks collectively call them as, Fanga or whomever, depending who you include. And pointing to that as a concentration of power, that is historically prone to abuse when you have concentration of power. Do you find that concentration of power and is problematic? Do you feel that might have been kind of the root cause of what could possibly go wrong with in Web 2?
Yeah, I'm one of those who, takes a more nuanced view on the size of these companies. I think, you always have to be wary historically of companies that have a consolidated market position, has, a large market share, and therefore isn't dependent on competition to keep themselves honest in whatever dimension you may care about. But I think some of the problems I was just outlining are not a function of size. With respect to Facebook or Meta, there's a lot of cry sometimes to break them up, and a lot of focus on antitrust solutions. But a lot of the issues are really concentrated on the blue apps. So I think if you pulled apart Instagram and WhatsApp and Oculus, a lot of these issues would remain. Breaking them up isn't a solution for some of the more, acute issues that I believe are, the things that we need more efforts to address. In terms of thinking about the scope of the problem, it's not just Meta, as you pointed out. My own former company, I think some of the issues of ideological rat holes and how people get influenced are presented on YouTube as well, which is its own form of social network. And I just think that part of the issues that I'm describing have to do with, and why it's not presented in the same way by Amazon, is that you're making people's psyches available. And this is what I call, you're making your users programmable. If you understand the minutia of what makes people tick through their social interactions, their expressions, and the things that they make clear that they care about, and you find a way to make that psychometric profile accessible to advertisers, including those who are not just trying to sell products and services, that opens a lot of room for tampering and social manipulation. It makes it possible to spread social diseases, literally, through the services that you are providing. I think a lot of, let's say, what Alphabet does, they collect a lot of psychometric detail, but providing ads against search results is different than providing ads against people's profiles. And, it's a little more purely economic rather than literally selling people based on the contents of their psyches to the highest bidder or to those who would pay.
That's very interesting. Let's actually talk a little bit deeper about it. What is a psychometric profile? You mentioned it a couple of times. I want to make sure people are kind of on the same page there. And then you mentioned the term social disease. Let's talk a little bit more of what you mean by that.
Yeah, so a psychometric profile is one that, and let's make no mistake, all of the big companies keep very detailed information about their users, their tendencies, what they like, what they're likely to buy, what gets them mad, what gets them happy, who they care about, and all of these, details of daily life that we share through the platforms are compiled and analyzed by machine learning algorithms, and they create an actionable profile of, subsets of users. And literally, when you have an ad system that allows you to choose multiple categories, multiple dimensions of users, you may not say, I want to target this ad to user X as an identified person. But if you say, I want to target users who enjoy, shopping online and who really have, issues with this kind of thing. That kind of thing may not be, directly about buying guns or voting conservative or voting liberal, but it can be analyzed as a proxy issue. And so when you're wanting to target content to users that will provoke them and maybe impact their sentiment about a particular political outcome or other outcome, you as a provider are creating all of these channels. And literally, when I say programmable users, I mean it. When you go into an ad system to place ads and you get to choose in a very fine-tuned detail who you want to target, and you have an agenda behind that, it's very easy. You're tapping into the psyches of millions of users, if not hundreds of millions in a given fell swoop. And if you are a player who wants to influence sentiment based on disinformation or falsehoods, and you're getting people riled up such that they can go on murderous rampages against their own fellow citizens, I'll call that a social disease. And we have all of the other aspects of, certain users feeling really bad about themselves, getting bullied. This plays out in many different realms, not just politically. But if, as a result of sharing and as a result of getting content, not just from people you care about, but from people who are throwing sort of advertised ideas and sentiments into the mix, you become vulnerable to catching social diseases if how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the world, how you feel about, your fellow citizens is unduly influenced by the kind of targeting that's happening.
Yeah, interesting. And I think the emphasis here is that it's not one-to-one, it's one-to-many, right? So you can identify the profile, and if it falls in the wrong hands, you can sort of, at scale, cause those issues, whether they're political or personal or commercial, that might not have been there and may negatively impact individuals, communities, societies. Very interesting, and I guess it stems from the fact that you have sort of such a unique point of view into kind of what, as you said, makes people tick, who they are as people, and where they're vulnerable. There's a lot of discourse around Web3 and how it may address some or many of those issues. There's, of course, a lot of skepticism too. Maybe you can define Web3. What is Web3 to you? Maybe in comparison with Web2. And then I do want to go into conversation of, what is the promise of Web3 and whether it can actually deliver on addressing some of the shortcomings that we talked about in Web2.
So Web3 is, I'd say, an emerging concept. It's positioning. A cynical view is that it's a conception of the future of the web that would solve a lot of the ills of Web 2.0. But really, the motive is to sell a bunch of technologies around and services and applications around blockchain, and whether that can really address all of these issues remains to be seen. There are a lot of well-considered folks who consider it a bit of hype, but there are a lot of investors who are lining up behind this concept because they see a lot of promise. And in its best representation, I think of Web3 as a hopeful direction for recapturing some of the idealism that existed around Web 1.0. And so what is some of that idealism? The idea that anyone could create a web page and share content and connect with a broad community wherever located around the globe was revolutionary at the time. And this idea that you don't just have to be a consumer, but you could be a producer. You can create a business of your own. You can be fully expressed, engage with a community beyond the people in your immediate sort of geographically limited us, social circles was, really great. And that is still some of the goodness that we're experiencing today. And, I think in many ways, Web 2.0 has made that even more possible. So this idea that if we use blockchain technologies, which is, I'll give a high level characterization of it. It really, what it does is enables some private ordering of mechanisms that we traditionally relied on bigger public institutions or large private companies to attend to. So what do I mean by that? The biggest application of blockchain technology is cryptocurrencies. And there's, in the back end, this ledger system that keeps track of transactions in a high fidelity way. So it gives you a sense that behind this digital currency, there is some backstop, there is some source of truth. And it's not that the government, which traditionally is the backstop for currencies, has to be involved. There's a private ordering of, how these transactions are kept, how these ledgers are kept, and how that supports trust in the system. And so using that foundation, the idea is to say, well, hey, if we can do these kinds of things that traditionally we relied on governments or really large institutions like credit agencies to handle, maybe we can build a bunch of services around that and really have users and producers take back, some of what we see as the ailments of Web 2.0. So that's the setup. I have my own doubts about it.
Let's talk about doubts. I guess what is where do your doubts from? Stem in addressing the challenges of Web 2.
Yeah, there are a few. I think there's, some of the issues around Web 2.0 has to do with privacy and the bargain that each of us as users makes to give up some of our privacy or a lot of it in order to enjoy the full range of, the services and experiences that we get from different platforms. And it's not clear to me how Web3 technologies will attend to privacy. What blockchain technologies allows you to do is to ensure security in certain ways and to have some sort of auditable transparency behind things that you've done. But whether it can really safeguard privacy interests and whether the economic models built up around different applications can avoid some of the targeting that I mentioned and how that can go horribly wrong remains to be seen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at, blockchain applications and kind of platforms, they are not designed to be private. I think you correctly pointed out, they're designed to be secure in the sense of you hiding things in the plain sight. You're hiding data in the plain sight. And it's easy to talk about data and it being secure in plain sight unless you realize that, your personal information could be that data. And then it becomes uncomfortable, because, we may seek transparency, but some things we consider inherently private. And so hiding them in public ledger becomes a little bit challenging and problematic. So that is one thing that would be interesting to see how privacy issues will be addressed. And I do believe that the blockchain technology is very much coming to the head with regulations we have around privacy. Our trend toward privacy regulation is more enhanced, and the blockchain trend is sort of in a different direction. almost 180 degrees. So it will be interesting to see. Are there other challenges that you think? I think privacy is definitely sort of one because it's so going in different directions. But are there other challenges that you think that blockchain technology may not be able to address?
Yeah, invariably, new technologies that challenge established orders will be met with some consternation. And here I'm thinking about, governments and their relationships to cryptocurrencies, for instance. I think China, for instance, as a country is still very wary of cryptocurrency. Increasingly in the US, there seems to be more acceptance, but the SEC is still working through, different ways to regulate the use of cryptocurrencies. So, instead of initial public offerings, you have initial coin offerings, and there are all of these exotic sort of instruments being created around cryptocurrencies and, very sort of creative business models. But whether they pass muster from a securities law standpoint, whether speculation in the value of cryptocurrencies, which fluctuates quite wildly, is permissible or is subject to fraudulent behavior in the way that before securities were regulated that they were. These are open questions, and so I think any model that relies on supplanting a core function that an entity such as a government or established interests such as credit bureaus have traditionally, sort of served, then it's going to run into some headwinds.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Biden executive order. I mean, it's nice. I've been in blockchain and crypto for a while now. I even had a full-time job there a few jobs ago. It's nice that the United States government finally acknowledged that thing where I had a job was real, that it was not just imaginary job.
Yeah.
That was nice. But I wonder because you frame some of the issues in Web 2 around the sort of collection of data and psychometric profiles and kind of misusing and that data falling into wrong hands and like making people tick. And we've seen some of that done, in elections and for, private benefit and political, social, communal gains. Do you think this is a tool to kind of deal with those problems?
Yeah, it's interesting. And, just thinking about it, people will often conflate privacy and security. And in a certain way, they're very much related. If I'm running a web platform and it's not secure and someone with untoward motives can break in and get my user data, then I'm compromising their privacy vis-a-vis that third party. And, in those two things, if I ensure better security, I ensure user privacy with respect to third parties. They're very much related. But the kind of security that blockchain technologies offer is authentication security, that I can trust that this transaction is valid, that the thing that I'm receiving for money or some other form of value, this coin, there's some backing to it, that it's a real entity. And authentication security is important, but it's a very different kind of security than the ones we think about related to ensuring privacy interests. And in fact, authentication security requires transparency and auditability, and reliability. And ultimately, if as a provider, you can't ultimately protect your authentications of a particular set of users from sort of government inquiries, or if as a function of your business model, that transparency has to be universal among your users, then you really have to think about what personal information that may be bound up in a particular transaction or interaction that you're authenticating, you need to safeguard, and how else do you get that done? So just understanding the mechanisms of blockchain, I think on its own, it won't be sufficient. And if the premise of Web3 is that you build it entirely from that foundation, I think it'll address some critical issues, and it might enable an amazing new set of services. But I just don't think of it as a cure for some of the issues that we've talked about with Web 2.0.
This has been such a great conversation, and I'm clearly a fan of technology and this technology and prior technology. Just love technology, I guess. The time flew by, and very interesting conversation. I guess I'll ask you as a goodbye, because I very much enjoy this conversation, and I think it's very thought provoking, and all of us who unavoidably will be going forward and thinking how this technology fits with the old, whether we run on a parallel path where some of it is replaced. What is it, one thing you want folks to take away from this conversation as we are all at some point will be actively building the future. Those of us who show up to work every day and thinking how our products and services evolve and how we contribute to society, what kind of legacy we leave. What is the one message you want folks to consider as they go through that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to encourage folks to be very active, not necessarily as activists, but just to be very engaged in these issues. Throughout our discussion, we've discussed the roles that governments can play, both as bad actors as well as, good actors in trying to grapple with not only the new technologies, but the social dynamics that they're influencing, and coming up with tailored regulation that might help address it. And, having worked at Yahoo, at Google, and understanding how a lot of the companies operate, I genuinely believe that they want to do good and bring good to the world, but they don't necessarily have all the guidance that they need, the guardrails and rules of engagement from the public sector that they need. And ultimately, their profit interests and their business growth interests may have them take certain liberties that aren't in the best interest of users. So we can't just rely on public interest organizations to advocate on behalf of we the people as citizens and consumers. And we need to be actively engaged in helping to formulate some of what should come next, how to keep the good while safeguarding against the bad. And it requires folks at different levels who just have a very plain, everyday understanding of what they experience through the internet, as well as lawyers and engineers who might have another level of depth of understanding, who can help, sort of get thoughts and perspectives out there. So I think it just requires that we be fully engaged in this.
Yeah, thank you, Duane, for that. Thank you for finding the time to talk to me. I every time I talk to you, you reframe issues for me. You've been doing this now for almost 20 years. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And I love your experiences in Web 1, Web 2, now going to Web 3, and with all kinds of technologies from SaaS to AI on intersection of buy or not. So clearly, you're a man who've seen quite a few things. The concept that I like is that, being active with, you don't have to be an activist to be active, right? Being engaged, being intentional, thinking about implications of what you're creating, of your products and services. I think that's a very, very powerful idea. We as citizens, we as lawyers who help companies to really make good decisions, can guide them on. So thank you for that conversation. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, thank you for having me. I appreciate seeing how, you've developed, you have a very 360 perspective on the technology industry and how you like to engage with it and engage people who are active in it. And it's great.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I want you to start thinking what it means to be active, and not necessarily being an activist. If that's your jam, go for it. But being active and being intentional and being professional and being kind of part of a building community, which all of us are sooner or later, one way or another, and what it means to provide legal advice in that context, and how to do this responsibly, and how to do it well, so that we sort of leave the world in a better place than we found. Technology is definitely what I call is a sharp knife, and you can use it to cure, and you can use it to kill. So let's make sure that we create, an amazing tool that really lives sort of the world in a better place and shape than we found it. If you have any recommendations of who else can enrich in-house practice, whether it's personal, professional, community, or sort of future looking, definitely let me know. I find that there's a lot of thought leaders in-house, and they have many views and tools and know-how that should be shared widely, so we can all learn from. So definitely let me know who those folks are, and I will be sure to invite them to have this conversation. And with that in mind, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye, everyone.